The notion of low to high is really one of greater capability, greater awareness, greater the number of dynamics that they're handling at one time, and almost the greater enhancement they can bring to the situation.
Higher, in the way you frame it, is attending to the life-giving, enhancement providing permission and capacity of you as a life. When you're in that space, you're acting from the higher part of yourself.
We live in a time where we've got thoroughly disappointed with people who've set themselves up in the higher position to help us. Because really, your government, your leader of your country, we should welcome them as people who are going to take us to a better place. But generally, we get thoroughly disappointed.
In an attempt to potentiate a corrective move on the three problems. Corrective move on what didn't deliver itself from the promise of religion, and part of the corrective move there was, instead of focusing on the priests, the people that know, the royals, turning back to ourselves, us being the mediators for possibility.
We need to rewrite what is a good scientist, and we need a spiritual scientist. And because to me, I've got a science degree, and I think scientists have made a classic mistake. Because they've if you draw a line, on the one side you put everything that's dead, and the other side you put everything that's alive. Science says we will only measure life according to something that's dead, meaning the microscope or the satellite dish, and these are all non-living instruments. Whereas we are alive, and we work by a far more sophisticated technology that can register far more and detect far more.
Welcome to Portals of Perception, where we always are in the process of cultivating our greater connective and creative potential. Humanity has entered a phase transition that we describe as the culmination of the epoch. As the epoch culminates, all around and inside each one of us, humanity is concurrently experiencing a deep crisis of the spirit. And the many crisis points that are underway, together they form what we describe as the complexity wall that creates the meta-crisis. And these directly emanate out from and or are byproducts of this sense of a deeper crisis of the spirit. That is to mean humans being separated from the natural sources that were meant to be part of the daily bread in everything we do in our relational, communal spaces. And so cultivating the connective potential and the human capacity to naturally produce higher connected states needs to be cultivated as part of our endeavor to facilitate a healthy and regenerative future. I'm here today with Jerry Pike to reflect on his endeavor in these spaces over several decades, and the way he explores and inquires into these spaces to ground his approach in an emergent truth, to detect the case for what it is, and then the way he explores in terms of the creative and the connective capacity, the kind of practices and processes that unlocks that potential. So Jerry, first, welcome. It's great to have you here. And what would you say on the front end by way of introducing yourself and by way of describing the central inquiry of your adult life?
Okay, thank you, Aviv, for that introduction. I think I'd start by saying what preoccupies me is what's important. When we look at all the affairs of life and all the different things that people do, and from recreation to building businesses to discovery to artists. But I've always had this central inquiry, well, what is actually important? And I'll start in, and what seems to me to be important and has been going on throughout history is that the human race generally has always been preoccupied by the higher, that there's something out there that is higher than them, and can they access it? And you've seen that really throughout the centuries in religion. Really, one way of saying what a religion is, it's an attempt to communicate with higher states and have a relationship with whatever that higher thing is. And you'll also find it in any kind of indigenous tribe, that they'll have their shamans or special people that could communicate better with some higher states. And today it got knocked on the head by when science came along. Science said, well, we're open to anything, providing you can prove it. And really, the thing about the higher things is that it's a very human experience, and the scientific instruments can't rise to it. So when they looked at it through their scientific instruments, they found nothing. But as a human being, if you tune into this area, you can feel many things. So science came along and almost put a kind of stop upon the idea that there was anything other than us at play on this world. But it's interesting that the spiritual interest has really, in the past 50, 70 years, appeared and surged and become a huge movement in the world. And in the same way, we're asking that same question. You know, what is there something enhancing and of kind of greater significance at play in our lives that may not be conscious through the physical senses? And in my mind, I kept coming back to the fact, well, what is it that could really make a difference to the human race? What could really help us navigate the problems we face in a better way?
Before we go to the problem space, let me stay with the first few things you said and ask 2 or 3 further questions there. So you're describing a sense of seeking the higher, and you're talking about a profoundly large wave over the last 60, 70, 80 years, really from after the Second World War, a couple of decades after, perhaps beginning in the 60s, that unleashed certainly, well, globally, certainly in the Western world, a new spiritual quest that had its many natures and expressions. And so here are the 3 questions. First of all, to help people that may get stopped on your first framing, when you talk about higher, can you clarify whether you, in that framing of the higher, you are inclusive of us, of the human being, such that we don't fall here into a dual, 2 worlds kind of view where you describe a higher world that excludes the human? Can you clarify first that conundrum? And how do you grapple with that? Because for many people, when you talk about higher, if they were trained and educated by the traditional Christian framing and other religions, the governing theology was the 2 worlds theology, and the earthly life and the afterlife, and we're here in waiting for the afterlife. Younger generations were no longer interested in that. We want to know how we can live the higher worlds and the after right in the here and now, and whether these are actually integrated framing. So that's an inquiry 1. And then I'd like us to come back to what is it that you believe is the awakening, why it is arising at this time, and then lead into your question or where you started to go into the problem and so on. But can you address first that conundrum of finding a way not to look at it as 2 separate worlds?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because as you just described, religion is a kind of bit of a classic for saying there's a them and us, and we are lowly and something above us is high, and we need to, smarten up if we are to, be acceptable to it. But I think just a little quick run on the notion of high compared to low and what it tends to mean, because you see it all over the place. I mean, you see it in businesses where you get the person who deals with sales inquiries in the big company, and then you get the person higher up who's the managing director. And it has different connotations in the sense that higher, and just to put it clear, I think I need to get to the point where higher is all around us and in us, and we have higher things in ourselves as well as lower things. And I think we might be surprised by how much higher is actually in us already without tipping our cap to some external higher. But just to go back to what high is unto itself, it generally means something that has greater vision on the situation. It has greater capability to bring to the situation, and it is more causative upon the situation. So that's why the leader of a country can be more instrumental in making a change than the person who works in an office in the country, because they're in a higher position. So the notion of low to high is really one of greater capability, greater awareness, greater the number of dynamics that they're handling at one time, and almost the greater enhancement they can bring to the situation. So people, well, if you're into royalty, some people are not, but see the queen or the king as an enhancement to the situation, because they are in, a sort of higher position.
And so if you transfer this idea to the individual person, what you're proposing there is I may be in a localized awareness if I deal with a problem right here, right now, that's on my desk to solve. That's me in the localized awareness. And you're saying a human being has the capacity to transcend the local issue and embrace and encompass what you'd call as higher awareness, where I see the problem and I see myself seeing the problem, and I encompass greater and greater framing of what is this problem nested in. And when I'm in that place of awareness, that place of consciousness, you'd frame it as this is higher awareness and consciousness, which is not demeaning or lessering the capacity to address a local situation, but rather one that's encompassing, is more meta and inclusive and integrative of all that there is. What would you say to disagree or to expand from how I'm internalizing your framing?
I think as we're starting to realize that every human being by its design has so much in it, often that we never realize or never even use, and including higher faculties compared to lower faculties. So you need a certain sort of faculty to go and dig the garden, but you might need a different faculty to say, what does my child need in order to grow up better? And you start using a different faculty in yourself to contemplate and draw intelligence to that. And I think we're going to get surprised as to just how much is within that human design, even to the point of divinity, that we actually all carry divinity within us. So it's not something that we have to build a temple for and go to that temple to feel divinity. We can feel it within. And I'll just put a curious thought into you, thought into this situation, because there's a lot of debate, say in England, where I am, about royal families and are they good or are they bad. But I think the royal thing, that the royal affair, is actually something that lives in every person. That there's something royal in every person. But history has tended to translate that into, we need to create people who are royal for us. Whereas perhaps what we need is to realize that there's something special in each of us, something with a royal deliberation, which should, a royal deliberation should actually be considering how to enhance its realm, how to draw its realm up to something better, and that we have that same kind of essence consideration in ourselves. So this idea of the higher, which in history has always been external to people, I think we're entering a phase, this changeover, this spiritual changeover, or spiritual appearance, is starting to realize that instead of looking outside of ourselves for the enhancement that we seek, the change is that the enhancement is primarily available within by how we can access it, along with many other things. It's not just purely a person on their own, but it's as if we've grown up with authority coming at us from outside of us for hundreds and thousands of years. And I think the spiritual sense is saying we all have an innate inner authority to ourselves. And this is starting to become the persuasion. And there's a less need on, well, I'm not saying there's not a need for external authority, but it might change in the amount of influence it has upon us, because we're starting to feel our own inner authority that has its own inner guidance system, that has its own intelligence, that has its own sense of how to make things better or bring well-being. And it doesn't need convention and tradition to kind of tell us how to do it. I don't know which question I've answered, but
yeah, no, it's great. You're also, in a way, suggesting that we pause for a minute with the higher and the lower. And the reason we're pausing with it is to be completely transparent about it. It's because part of the conundrum of this moment in time is the post-modern, a reductionist, a flat earth mindset that wanted to do away with anything that represented structures or articulations of hierarchies, because so much of what historically the hierarchical arrangement represented itself to be was injurious of what is naturally arising in people. So part of the corrective impulse of the postmodern movement when it started to appear with the hippies in the 60s was, let's do away with all that. But when that pendulum went all the way to the end, we did away with natural gradients, with natural levels. And what you are trying to assert at the beginning of our exploration here is the natural place of higher and lower. And my probing with you is helping people that are coming along for the ride with us disarm whatever triggering psychologies people may have about higher, because what you're saying, higher is not more important or better. Higher is a naturally arising process in every living system. And one other way perhaps to test with you whether you'd agree with that. So nobody would say that an adult is higher than the pure sense that arises with a toddler. And yet you will say, in the way you frame this, one of the ways to think about higher in the way you framed it in the context of royalty and the fact that within each and every human there is the royal potential, the noble potential. And the way you said that so beautifully was, well, when you're attending to that, your primary consideration will be providing assistance, providing enhancement to the realms that you occupy. So in a way, you would expect the child to be more in the taking, in the consuming, in the needing phase, where you expect that through the maturation of life, adult graduates to the point of you're more in the life-giving. So I am proposing that what I heard in what you said, that higher in the way you frame it, is attending to the life-giving, enhancement providing permission and capacity of you as a life. When you're in that space, you're acting from your higher, the higher part of yourself, your life-giving, your presence giving, your enhancement giving. Whereas when you're in the I need now as a consumer, which we all have. This was the point you're making. We are both the high, the middle, and the low. And when we are acting from the high, we are in that space. How would you reframe or restate that?
Yeah, because I think what we are liable to find is that the world as we know it, which is full of high, low, good, bad, but in a way, the human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we have all these things in us. And I think also to try and look at existence with clearer eyes, it uses the higher and the lower, in a great weave, in a great kind of orchestration. And yet, generally, the greater blessings come from those who are in that capability of the higher faculties, the higher departments, the higher essences, these kind of things. So, as you're saying, it's not to sort of put one better than the other, high and low, but I think the enhancement possibility comes more from the higher aspects. And I think we live in a time where we've got thoroughly disappointed with people who've set themselves up in the higher position to help us. Because really, your government, your leader of your country, we should welcome them as people who are going to take us to a better place. But generally, we get thoroughly disappointed.
So this is a natural segue. You were going to lead into describing the problem of this time and why indeed attending to the higher potential of life is so critical at this time.
Yes, because I'd go back to the idea of, for some reason or other, the human race has been very interested in religion. And, even though a lot of people now sort of say, well, look, this is ridiculous, religion. You can't prove it, you can't touch it. Are you sure it exists? But we have seemed to be very prone to it. But the essence of it is that we want to be influenced by something higher. We want it to help us through. We want it to show us the way. This often seems to be the cry from the religious people, to the point that certainly in sort of Western history, the kings and queens of the country were supposed to be the ones that had a divine connection to the intelligence of the higher levels. And from that, they were meant to then administer their realm. And yet generally in history, kings and queens were very underdeveloped often, and really, fell far short of that. But the belief was there that something could communicate to these higher realms. And we have tended in the typical fashion to say, well, somebody over there is going to do it for me. The priest will talk to God for me and help me, or the king or queen is going to communicate with the higher levels and bring this country into shape. But what I think the spiritual upsurge in today is starting to say is that we are all radio sets of the higher, and that we can all tune in to all levels and start to determine in ourselves how we're going to play this orchestra of the high and the low instruments to build something else. This might be a slight deviation, but I've got to put it in one way. I feel it's possible to attract high states to yourself. So this is not just me having high thoughts. I feel you can actually, and you feel it sometimes, like you can go into a temple or a religious building and feel an atmosphere. And it just feels richer and more enhanced than outside the building. And I've had many experiences of attracting higher atmospheres, and it's like a presence, it's a well-being. And this is where I think we can, there's a whole chapter, I feel, that can open up in the spiritual exploration of higher states that can be present with the human. So it's not just saying, well, I had a meditative process and I had a really good set of ideas come to me, and I feel that was my higher departments delivering me, some sort of kind of relevant perception. It's saying that we could refine our society, our affairs, to not everywhere, but start to have places where you could get into better states, a greater enhancement, a greater almost like glow in the human faculty, from which it's like a kind of brighter, more vibrant way of opening up our areas of consideration. That instead of just me being able to put my education in and join the dots in a better fashion, it starts to bring intelligences that is, not of my mind into the picture. And I think there's a great promise here. It's almost like the promise of religions. I'm not sure if it really happened, but I think there's a promise today, and I feel I've had times of being instrumental in it happening, that we can engage in the higher levels within us and to some extent attracted from without us, that could really start to transform, if it were possible, the United Nations getting together and trying to work out what to do about problems in the world. Imagine being in the United Nations with attendance of higher feelings, higher states of awareness, and then looking at the problems of the world.
So let me retrace the steps you took us through. Your step one was to recognize that there has been from the beginning of time tremendous interest in religions and in the sense of something higher. That was step one. And then you said step two, it kind of worked in that it evoked much in people, but also didn't work in that it often didn't deliver on what people were looking for. That was your step two. Your step three was somewhere in the middle of the journey, something else happened, which was science came in and said, well, put this aside because nothing here is provable. And it kind of introduced a reset. And the reset in itself brought tremendous discoveries and capabilities, but it left us with at least half or more than half of who we and what we are and what we can reach for offline.
Yeah.
That was step three. Now, step four, you said, something has occurred over the last 60, 70 years, and even more so in the last 2-3 decades. And you're saying what that has been about has been an attempt to potentiate a corrective move on the three problems. Corrective move on what didn't deliver itself from the promise of religion, and part of the corrective move there was, instead of focusing on the priests, the people that know, the royals, turning back to ourselves, us being the mediators for possibility. That was one element of that. And then you said the other outcome of that is the sense and the exploration, maybe the fifth element in this step-by-step journey you've taken us to, that once we turn to ourselves and we say, no, my search is not in the cathedral without, or the temple, or the synagogue, or the church. It's in the church of life, the synagogue of life, the temple of life, where each modeled on this configuration, what is it that I may be able to get to in myself and with others? And right there, you started to talk about we are each being a radio set and with the potential to reach for higher states. So before we go further into what are higher states, what are those higher feelings, how do we access these, is there anything else you'd place on this retrace of the steps you took us through?
All right, no, that's a very good summary.
Okay.
But I would, put one thing. This is to do with what is this spiritual arising, and what is it suggesting? And although this is not particularly talked about in the spiritual community, I feel obviously it is there, which is that we should be pursuing the truth, and we should be pursuing reality, because I don't think spirituality is just a nice to have, and it's, if it sort of tickles your fancy, it's a nice area to get into. I think it is actually the greater truth of what's going on with the human race. And if you think about the times of religion compared to what we know now, and it's not just the knowledge we've got, it's the fact that you can have somebody going around with their mobile camera in a sort of Amazon rainforest, showing you life in a native village there. We've seen insight into all aspects of the human life here. And I think it's really started to open us up and make us more aware and embracing of the huge multiplicity here, but also allowed us now, I think, you see, we're in this great position to use all of that to start becoming more realistic about areas that up to now have been just belief systems. And in a way, I would put a bit of a challenge in here that people tend to love their beliefs. And obviously you've got the belief of, I'm a Hindu, and no, I'm a Muslim, and, don't challenge my beliefs, but I'll let you carry on with your beliefs. And in spirituality, people say, well, my belief is so-and-so. And I think the thing that I think is a bit of an issue there is that people tend to think the important thing is to be strong about their beliefs and to print themselves with their beliefs. But really, beliefs are just a stepping stone of which we should be constantly assessing them to see if it's driving us towards a reality. And they should really be helping us to, can we get more into the reality of it? So with the spiritual affair, I feel we're starting to realize that there's levels beyond the physical that are more fascinating than the physical. And this is things like feelings, emotions, the instinct, the intuition, the ability to perceive, consciousness itself. These are all non-physical states that are very intimate to our lives. These are the things that move us and, get us up in the morning and make us want to understand more.
So I know you're heading further deeper into that, but you just introduced that sixth move in the trace you are taking us through, the search for truth. And you grounded us in how, in part, thanks to technology, we now have the capacity to reach and be informed by so much more, as is the case in this planet of polarities. There is also the polarity of that, which makes your inquiry into truth a lot more challenging at the moment, partly because we also live into a time that has been by some defined as post-truth, post-everything, but certainly post-truth. We're part of the post-truth paradigm is the thought that truth is socially constructed. So I can choose my truth. That's what the point you're making about, no, I feel very strong about something, and because of that, it is true. And I think the challenge you're introducing is a bit of a pushback and a challenge back to the idea that I can create my bubble of truth to the exclusion of all other truth, and so we can each hide in our own bubble of truth in the intersubjective space and convince ourselves of a truth. But you're saying, no, the tree grows from its roots. And it grows from its roots, facilitated by this theater of life we see on planet Earth, enabled by this seasonal arrangement. And this is just one way of grounding ourselves in a truth that's not shaped by what I like or what I dislike, what feels good for me. By the way, this is in most circumstances feels good, although if you're in a very cold place in the winter, maybe it doesn't feel so good. But that is part of what we come up against when you talk about introducing the search for truth as a central element of the spiritual quest and of addressing the human potential. And when you say, no, the search for higher states, the search for higher feeling, the search for unlocking the higher potential, it's not just to make me feel good and it's nice to have, it actually is an inseparable part of realizing who I am as a human being and what is life all about. Say a little more about how you configure the place of truth, the search for truth inside this conundrum.
Yes, because I'm not trying to say to anybody, don't be strongly attached to your beliefs. I think it's more the suggestion of a shift in attitude, that a belief is something you should constantly try to substantiate and check. And if it's sort of starting to suggest it might need to be a bit of a shift in that belief, be open to shifting. You know, and I think I'm also coming down the line that, you know, the human race, that bit of the human race that endeavors into new areas and wants to understand things better, that we should have the attitude of, can we explore and experiment and discover more about these intangible areas that, because they're intangible, people have said, oh, we can't talk about them, we can't prove them. And for example, you know, the words soul and spirit have been around in the human race for thousands of years, and people just use them without thinking. It's you know, you can say that music's got soul or he's got spirit.
It's even more than that, Jerry. It has become fashionable to bash anything that's spiritual as a way of virtue signaling. No, I'm scientifically based in the work I do. I'm a serious person, so therefore I'm not going to talk about anything spiritual, because once you talk about spiritual matters, you quote unquote move outside of the paradigm of the scientific truth, and you're challenging that. You're saying, no, we've got to reintegrate the other forms and levels of knowing and experience and capacity for human life. And the point I think you're making, which is what I'm asking you to assert further, you're saying it's not just nice to have. We are not likely to be able to solve the complex challenges in front of us, global affairs, you mentioned United Nations, or geopolitics or economics or anything else, unless we make that integrative move. That's what I'm hearing in what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, a graphic example is there's so much evidence for life after death if you start looking, including people who say they've been to the other side and come back. And they don't seem to be deluded. They seem to be fairly sensible people. And that's just one small part of the evidence for life after death. And if I had my way, I would say the government of whatever country you're in should sanction an investigation into the reality of that. And perhaps it should be taught in schools, for example, if they came to the conclusion that it seems that there is life after death. But actually, the scientific view still hangs over the modern world today. And whilst we all pay our respects to people who have departed, the official view is that there is no life after death. And this is one of the truths we need. You know, we've got so much resources, we've got so much access to people's experience, that we could really start to change the landscape in terms of what are our sort of beliefs that seem to be now well substantiated. So
you just pushed the envelope all the way to the edge of the continuum. We are nudging into higher states and higher feelings, and some will not follow us all the way to life after death. And your message is, That's fine. You don't have to go there. You don't have to believe that. But what you may want to do is be curious and ask questions and ask whether you believe that this thing, the intelligence of life as we experience it, is just one day over, or does it have some other form of continuance, and begin to be contemplative. And your invitation is, don't let the scientific paradigm that we love so much because it enables us so much, don't let that be the limitation of your exploration and contemplation. So, please.
Well, I think we need to rewrite what is a good scientist, and we need a spiritual scientist. And because to me, I've got a science degree, and I think scientists have made a classic mistake because they've if you draw a line, on the one side you put everything that's dead, and the other side you put everything that's alive. Science says we will only measure life according to something that's dead, meaning the microscope or the satellite dish, and these are all non-living instruments. Whereas we are alive, and we work with far more sophisticated technology that can register far more and detect far more. But science has drawn a line in the sand and said we can't trust the human being. They make things up. So we'll stick to instruments that are not alive in order to measure this universe. And only if it turns up in the instruments that are not alive will we accept it into our consideration. So it's as if they've taken, if you said the whole of existence is like a house, they've moved into one room in the house and said, unless it appears in this room, it doesn't exist. But if you then allow yourself to go into, say, the other 9 rooms, in terms of like the wonder, the value, the love, the things and the sheer mystery of it all, you can't get to firm proof, because firm proof really only lives at the physical level. Like that water is hot, or that is the color blue. It's physical, and you can say it's true. But when we move into the non-physical level, like your feelings or your thinking patterns, suddenly it's all not provable. But I think we need a different term, which is it cross-checks, or there is substantia, or I like the legal definition that they use in courts. They say, they're guilty is beyond reasonable doubt. And this is where I think we need to move into opening up the living research that would use different parameters to what science has used to date.
So the framing you offer there offers us potent access to realize why this is so critical. Because what you're describing that life is like a mansion, and as you said, a house or a mansion, and we locked ourselves in one room, the scientific, empirically validated room, and we shut out the doors to the other 7 or 8 or 9 rooms. But the problem now is that inside this one room where we primarily occupied the space of the last 2 centuries, we've developed these extraordinary technological advances that are absolutely awesome because they've enabled us so much, including, for example, to talk on this platform. And we've also created a set of challenges and self-destruction capacity because we left out the other rooms. So what you're saying is now, opening the doors to reintegrate the other rooms in the mansion is not just to expand our space. It's not just because it will be fun. It's not just because it will be so wonderfully enhancing in terms of unlocking and unleashing these capacities. It actually is about averting the self-destruction that is rapidly unfolding in the one crowded chamber that we occupy. That's partly what I'm hearing in your message.
Well, yeah, I mean, I must admit, I'm not sure how we're going to address the huge problems in the world, other than it's warming to see this different kind of sentiment in people about things, which isn't exactly offering a solution, but you realize it's trying to dissolve the conflicted way we tend to address issues, or self-centered ways we address issues, that has led to the problem in the first place.
Perhaps one more round, one more question to nudge us into one more space to what you started talking to in the idea of higher states and higher feelings and attuning to these realms. So for somebody that never explored these inquiries deeply, it's more something they associate with a beautiful sunset or a moment with a loved one or a piece of music that moves them deeply. For others, it's about various practices in various faith traditions and or spiritual practices or meditative and so on practices. For others, it's more even into the psychedelic or the chemically induced and enhanced faculty activation in this way. You are proposing a different focusing practice and a pathway into these through feelings and sentiments, and we probably ought to devote an entire conversation to that. But by way of giving us a primer, a starter into this, what is it that you're actually describing by way of your process when you are accessing what you describe as sentiments and feelings that lead to higher states? What is it we are actually talking about?
I think it's going on the exploration of ways that lead us into the different departments of ourselves. And that there's enormous possibilities once you start to tap into faculties that are operating in ways we could probably never really work out. It's not like, you get a problem like you're digging the garden and you meet a tree root or something, and you think of the things you go through when you meet a physical problem. You think, oh, I'll get a tool, or I'll dig around it, or I'll get someone to help me, but that is quite different to a higher process, which is, for example, trying to compose a piece of music, and it's got a whole different sense of balances in terms of where you're trying to place yourself in, so that you can facilitate what is actually, I think it's fair to say, a higher process where it comes to being creative or composing a piece of music in this case. And there's different feelings that go with it. And I would say, for example, that one of the greatest faculties we have to explore the higher department is actually our feelings. It almost works better than our thoughts. Both are needed, but the feelings are, they're almost like unspoken intelligence. And a good example of it is, you've gone to some sort of party or something, and you spot somebody across the room, and something in you is drawn to them, and you don't know why. And yet, if you were to stop and try to dwell with that, it's like, is it a feeling or it's a nudging? But you could tune in, and obviously you're thinking you're going to talk to them and find out if there is a reason why you're attracted to them. But if you wait to that point, your systems start to bring you intelligence, or start to open up what it is that's gone like a light bulb to that person. And this is just, some of the more normal higher faculties we have that are available to us. And then, just to put it in, I'm sure for a lot of people, or you've met people who had very powerful religious, spiritual experiences. And it's really sort of touched something that, what tends to be a main feature of spiritual experiences is that, go back to that example of the tree root, hit a root, oh my God, and everything feels separated, things feel difficult, and you've got to scratch your head as to how to find the thing you want. And you think, oh God, if only I had an axe, I'll have to go out and buy one, and all these problems. But in the higher departments, things join up, things flow. There's a greater sense of being with something, or somehow merging together, and almost like becoming a joint affair rather than I'm stuck on my own trying to work out what I'm going to do. And I wish I'd paid more attention at school, because they might have given me knowledge that would have helped me here. And things are more separated out in the lower, and yet they're more joined together in the higher. So this is a bit of an opening ideas around what the higher way is like.
Beautiful.
And really, it's as multiple as life forms on the planet. I mean, there's just so much out there that is possible.
Beautiful. You are offering a pathway and a sense and felt and experienced access to what you're describing as higher states, higher feelings, through the idea of that sense of being with, being joined, being attended by, being accompanied. All those are different ways to describe the realms where the experience of life is not so divorced, not so separated, but more joined, and has a being with a quality. Perhaps that's the place to pause it and come back another time to ask, okay, great, how can I become more deliberate? And what kind of processes and practices and ecologies and ways of being with oneself and ways of being with others that will help me discover and explore these spaces by myself without having to follow a specific step-by-step meditation that was written about maybe 4,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, without giving anybody a set of clear rules, but giving access points and pathways and trails to travel and explore for yourself, because the initial point you made was we are each made in the image of the whole, hence the royal noble potential, which you also call divinity, is inherently present in each one of us. And oh, by the way, none of us is a copycat of the other. We are each unique, and so you will find your pathway in a unique way. But it's even more nuanced than that, because you don't want just to discover everything by yourself, because you may end up in fantasy land. There are ways and capabilities and processes to ground yourself time and again in truth, and being in a pod with others who are practicing may help you validate what you are developing, such that you can discover your unique way and at the same time be grounded inside an ecology of practices and ways of being and doing and collaborating that unlocks your potential to sense and discover these realms.
Yeah, very well put. Yes.
Anything else in parting as we bring this to not to landing, because we just left a place we'll pick up next, but anything else that you would leave us with for the next exploration?
Well, perhaps just a final thought. As you were saying, we're all different, and the ways into this are, so multiple. But also, in a sense, the design of each of us is the same. And so the working parts of us, the platform upon which we experience our life, is the same for us all, gender differences aside. And really, the ways into the higher are part of how to find the art of helping this anatomy, including the unseen anatomy of our mind and our feelings, lead us into better places. So it's, this is the reality underpinning us, our design, which doesn't vary really through each of the human beings, and starting to find the reality by which we can make inroads into greater enhancement, assistance, and intelligence to our lives.
So right there is a purpose you offered, which is to explore, to discover these possibilities and potentialities, and rediscover the larger mansion that we are meant to inhabit and live inside of.